All right, so we'll try to get started here in just a couple minutes. We see some questions coming in. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started here in just a minute. If you guys want to start asking some questions, maybe introduce yourself. My name is Greg Undo. I'll be transmitting from Northern Virginia. So if you guys want to go ahead, we see some questions that we've had sent in. All right, so we'll try to get started here in just a couple minutes. Try to get started here in just a couple minutes. We see some questions coming in. All right. Okay, so we have some people logging in. So I see questions from Greg. All right, so all right, go ahead and get started here in just a minute. We'll go ahead and get started here in just a minute. If you guys want to start asking some questions, if you guys want to start asking some questions, maybe introduce yourself. My name is Greg Undo. I'll be transmitting from Northern Virginia. So if you guys want to go ahead, we see some questions that we've had sent in. All right, so we'll try to get started here in just a couple minutes. Try to get started here in just a couple minutes. We see some questions coming in. All right. All right, let me just go back to my Cubase screen here so you guys can see that. Okay, so we have some people logging in. So I see questions from Greg. All right, so all right, go ahead and get started here in just a minute. We'll go ahead and get started here in just a minute. If you guys want to start asking some questions, if you guys want to start asking some questions, maybe introduce yourself. My name is Greg Undo. I'll be transmitting from Northern Virginia. So if you guys want to close this out, sorry if there's the weird delay. Okay, so we see Jake from Kansas City. Let me know if my voice is sounding kind of not echoed now. All right, so I see your questions from Greg about slicing. I see Jimmy from Atlanta. Good to see you on. So we'll do slicing. We see tempo track. I'm just going to make notations here. I'll go ahead and play a little bit of audio and see if you guys can hear it okay. All right, so if you guys let me know if you could hear that piano and my voice okay. I usually have two laptops, but I only have one tonight, so I'm going to have to monitor the comments a little differently, so... All right, and we'll get started in just a couple minutes, get some people logged on here. Okay. Just to see, does anyone else? I see a comment from Jake that's getting the echo, and some other people say it's fine. So does it? So Jake, if you can let me know that the echo is okay now. All right, so wait just a couple more minutes. Wait just like another minute, and we'll go ahead and get started. Okay. So we see some questions on groove agent patterns and syncing to guitar track from Jake. Good to see you, Sir Robert. Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll get started here in just a second. Okay, so we had a couple of different questions that were sent in advance, and we have some that are more kind of some MediaBay stuff tonight. So we'll take a look at that. If someone wants to perhaps take a note of, like, as we kind of go through different topics, or if they're watching it after, if they want to kind of keep a almost like a meeting notes that of when we talk about different topics at what minutes, that would be helpful, and I could post that for people watching it afterwards. So as we kind of, one of the questions we had was someone who wanted to just kind of use like different like, do you have reverb on multiple tracks without necessarily having to have multiple reverbs open? So it's pretty easy to do. So if you wanted to come here, let me just open up a project here. And let's say if I wanted to have like multiple drums that are all going to the same reverb send. So there's a couple of ways of doing this. One is, instead of having an insert effect, and I see a lot of people who will load up like the same reverb as inserts on every single track. And it used to be in previous versions to Cubase prior to 7 that sometimes it wasn't as intuitive to add like a reverb send. So what you'd had to do previously was to come right over here, and as you kind of work with this, you could add an effects channel track by right-clicking. And then once an effects channel track has been added, such as reverb, so say if we activated our Revelation reverb here, that now we could go to our send levels, and then we could select the Revelation reverb bus, turn it on, and then set the amount of the wet-dry ratio here. So this way we have one reverb channel here, but multiple channels can access that same reverb, so it sounds like it's in the same room, all from accessing that one reverb sound. So if we just enable it. Now with 7.5, they added a great little trick within the mix console. So if I wanted to come right here, I could select my different channels. So let's say if I wanted to go to my settings here, we'll look at our racks, and let me just kind of pick some of my different, we'll hide our input channels for now. So as we kind of work with our input channels, we'll hide those, and I can now select all of my drum tracks here. Let's say these tracks, and then if I go to my sends, we can now just simply right-click, and then if I just right-click here, I could say, let's add effects channel to send 1. At this point, I could add a reverb. So let's say if I wanted to now add our reverence convolution reverb, we can now add that. Now, if you one of the things you do, which will make it easier if you actually used a quick link. I messed up here. So I could just use my quick link, turn this on in the mixer, or hold down Shift plus Alt. And at this point, now that I have those channels selected, I could just access my reverence reverb and I could turn it on for all the channels. And if I want to adjust the send level kind of for all the different channels, you could do that right there. So that's an easy way of having multiple devices, multiple tracks accessing that one reverb channel. And you'll see the reverb channel actually show up as your send directly here as well. So they'll just show up as an effect send. So we see the reference and the revelation right there. So that's how you could easily kind of use one effect send for multiple channels. Now we also had some questions. Next question was going to be on using like multi-timbral instruments. I'll start off with a new project. And we'll just start with empty here. And let's go ahead and add a multi-timbral VST instrument. So we could actually have some different types of effects and different types of plugins where they could be multi-timbral or not. So if we wanted to take a quick look at like a multi-timbral instrument, one of the most popular ones that comes with Cubase is Hallian Sonic SE. So I'm just going to add this. Now we have two different types of instruments, and these kind of have a heritage to the different reasons for instruments. So we had instrument tracks. So if I really quickly wanted to add an instrument track, I could come here and just say, okay, I just wanted to add this particular track right there. So I could just double click, and that's going to automatically, as soon as we do that, that'll automatically load up for us. It's going to create the instrument track right here, and that instrument is loaded up. And if we had our virtual keyboard open on our project window, we can now just play those particular sounds that way. So let me just make sure I have my routing set here real quick so you guys can hear it as well. So, but the problem was instrument tracks were kind of very fast, but they weren't necessarily flexible in some ways, because the instrument tracks were kind of fast and easy, but were limited to only being a stereo output and being monotimbral. So one of the things that we wanted to do was we also had kind of this history again of when we go to a rack instrument. Now the rack instrument, if we pulled something up like from our Hallian Sonic SE, again, and this is a 16-part multi-timbral instrument. So now once I have my instrument track, so the instrument track, think of it as being stereo and monotimbral, and now with my instrument rack, we could have it's automatically set up to be multiple outputs. So if I click just on the right here of the rack, we could activate all of the outputs, or you could do it one by one, or just simply choose to activate all the outputs right there. So you're going to have not only the capability of adding an additional track here and then being able to route it, so you could have 16 different sound sources going to this one instrument. With 7.5, they actually kind of wanted to get around the limitation of instrument tracks not being able to be multiple outputs or to have multi-timbral capabilities. So if you start off, and a lot of times people would start off with an instrument track and they go, oh, okay, this is great. And then they go, okay, within the same instrument, I wanted to have, I have 15 other sound slots that I could open up here. So what you could do now with if you started with an instrument track, sometimes some people felt they were kind of painted in the corner, But all you'd have to do now is you could click here just on the outputs, and once you've done that, you could activate all of your outputs on the side here. So if we wanted to have all the outputs, and if I have my instrument track selected here, and if I just choose to add MIDI tracks, so at this point I can say, okay, I wanted to add 15 MIDI tracks. So at this point, now we'll see that we have our instrument track here for our Halion Sonic SE, and these will automatically be routed to that same instance that we started the instrument track. And at this point, as you select your different channels, you could actually just see, so it's going to automatically increment and change the various MIDI channels right here. So as you just kind of load up different patches, you can just simply see all these patches. So even though you start with an instrument track, you can now have that instrument output not only multiple outputs and multiple MIDI channels, so it's multi-timbral within that instrument. So if you still wanted to have something like very quick and easy, like if you're just doing an instrument that's just a Fender Rhodes or something like that, you may not want to have multiple outputs, or you may not need that. So you could just start off with an instrument track. But if you're working with a large orchestral template inside of your Halion, it may make sense to start off with an instrument rack. But now you kind of don't necessarily have those limitations that you did in previous versions. So I hope that makes sense. But so, what was kind of a limitation before just really isn't one now since 7.5. So, all right. So we had a question from Jake about controlling the global reverb amount. So I'm just going to jump back to that project. So if you wanted to control the global reverb amount, let me just toggle this here real quick, and we'll go back to this project. So if you find that the global reverb amount is too high, once you go into your mixer, you would actually see the reverbs show up as your effects return channels here. So we see these kind of these color faders. So if the reverence was too high globally overall and you wanted to bring it down, you could just simply add or decrease the amount of reverb. And kind of an old school trick that some people would do when they had reverbs that didn't quite sound as brilliant. You could also just come here and actually apply EQ. So if you want to make the reverb a little brighter or darker, you could do that on the effects return channel. So you could just see it right there. So, all right. Now we also had some questions. A few questions regarding MediaBay. So it's, let me just find them from my list here. So one of the questions was, working with kind of, there's a request for, being able to kind of drag and drop from the preview window into MediaBay, or being able to, let me just add an audio track here, and also being able to kind of slice loops within the MediaBay. So someone thought that would be kind of a cool thing to do. So if we have the MediaBay on our main project window here, within our rack zones, and this is a feature within Cubase Pro 8, and you could just kind of hit Alt or Option T to get rid of that. So if I wanted to come right here, we'll close my virtual keyboard, and then if you just hit Alt T, that could open and close the rack zones. If you hit Alt Control T, that would switch the focus between the VST instruments and the MediaBay. So there's kind of a request. Now, if you don't, one of the things that when you come here, you could actually just kind of listen and preview different sounds here. So if you say, okay, I just want to listen to particular sounds, and you could just simply also use your arrow keys. So if you come here, so if I have that file there, we have our preview window here, but if you wanted to just simply just drag and drop that particular drum loop to your file, that's all you have to do. Now, one of the feature requests, or that's what someone had asked for, it was if you could just simply slice from within the MediaBay. Once you're in the project window, so let's say I just kind of drag a loop out here. So, if I have different, let me just find other drum beats here. So once you have an audio event, you could double click on it here in the sample editor. And as you can see, with Cubase 7.5, they added the capability where it's automatically detecting the hit points for you in the background. So if you wanted to actually navigate via those hit points, one of the things that's really handy is if you just kind of come here, you could just hit Alt-N. If you have that clip selected, you could just hit Alt-N or Alt-B, and that will kind of allow you to navigate. You can think of it kind of like almost like a tab to transient feature that other programs have. So as soon as you just simply have that selected, Alt-N. So, if you're finding like different drum hits, it's a really convenient way to navigate. So as you kind of, have the different previews here, you could just drag and drop directly from here. So you see the preview window here. So it's not necessarily dragging and dropping from here, but you always see it highlighted directly in the MediaBay. So, it's always very easy to just kind of drag and drop and have your projects automatically kind of work with that. So we'll move on to our next question that we had is where was the attributes inspector? So one of the things that you could actually do with MediaBay that makes it very powerful is you have the option to create your own kind of tabs or attributes. So if we look at some of our different functions here. All right, so I'm seeing a quick question here from Jake about when you go to preview that you don't hear anything. So the MediaBay goes through something that's called the listen bus. So a lot of times you may just simply kind of come here and not hear anything. So what you need to do is if you go to the VST connections window here, you have your outputs, but you also have something called the studio tab. So if I click right here, we can go to your outputs tab, and if we have this selected, you don't hear anything kind of automatically being previewed directly there. So if you go to your devices menu and select VST connections, or you could just open up the VST connections by hitting F4. We can create a stereo output channel, but don't actually define a physical connection. But if you go to your studio page, you can add different elements. So you could add like up to 4 different monitors. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have my primary stereo monitors here, some Yamahas. At this point, we'll just activate and say, okay, we'll have that activated. And once I have it set up going through, and this is the functionality of the control room here. So once I have that set in a control room, then you can just preview and hear everything. And it's really easy, especially if you have you just use your arrow down key and you could just audition different loops. So, Jake, so just make sure that you have it set again in the device setup, and not in the device setup, but in your VST connections rather. So under devices to VST connections, and at that point go to your studio tab. You may just have to turn that on, and then at that point just set your monitor here and make sure that you have this kind of turned off, because otherwise the signal can be double bust. So, sometimes people are like, oh, it sounds a little louder than I thought. And, So define the physical connection here, but don't route it, and have the routing handled in the control room itself. Then it'll make a little more sense. So the next question we had was, how do we access the attributes editor? And we do this kind of from the full MediaBay view. So a lot of times you may get, like over the years, I've collected different sample CDs, and I probably have 50,000 different drum loops in my collection, and it's really easy to have all those different media. So if I wanted to come here, we could open up, we go to media, and then we could just say, okay, let's go to our MediaBay. And MediaBay we could think of as kind of an overall area to actually have control of all of our different parameters that are kind of useful for a Cubase project. So if I wanted to come here, we could have kind of our directory tree here, so we could kind of see different files that we would want to access. If you're looking for audio files or presets, so if you wanted to just select your VST sound, we can now say, I wanted to see just MIDI files or just MIDI loops. So now I could just click here, that's all my MIDI loops. Or if I want to just look for channel strip presets, effects chains, video files, projects. But let's say I just wanted to find audio files. Now, one of the other questions we had was, okay, if I have audio loops that are on like or third-party loops or content that's on on an additional drive, like an external drive, maybe a USB 2 drive or something like that, where you have all of your different sample libraries and all your different drum loops, so you can move it from computer to computer. All you'd have to do is you could tell the MediaBay here to define the folders. So if I wanted to have the MediaBay come here, and I could say, okay, we're going to have it search for every single audio file on my F drive. We can see that it's actually scanning every single, and I have probably 10,000 audio files here, but it's indexing, and it's looking for every single file that's relevant for your Cubase production. So it's not going to show up like, your last year's tax returns and stuff like that. So it's only kind of looking for stuff that's relevant for your Cubase needs. So you can actually come here and pick and choose any folder and any file location, even if it's on a network, and have access to kind of all of your different sounds, presets directly here. Now, a lot of times you have different attributes here. So, and you could have some different attributes. So you could actually kind of choose, okay, if I wanted to view it by my broadcast wave file coding history, or the loudness value, or the name, the audio properties, the plugin, instrument. So you can pick and choose all of these different attributes. Now, if you come here to the lower left-hand corner, getting back to the question about the attribute inspector, or how to add the attributes, there's a little setup window, and we see this kind of sprinkled throughout the program. Like if I wanted to come here to my setting up my window layouts, we can kind of see this little setup window. If I go back to my MediaBay, and if we go to the lower left-hand corner, at this point, we'll see the attribute inspector. So generally, by default, this is disabled. So as soon as you have the attribute inspector, now you could actually add your own metadata tags. So if you wanted to literally also just come here, and you can say, okay, let's add our own user attribute. So one of the ones that I did is, sometimes you get a drum loop CD, I would find, and, I would maybe, for a particular style or project I was working on, I may not actually find a lot of the drum loops applicable. So you could actually make something like an attribute type, and we could say we want this to be text, and our display name, we could say, okay, we're going to have the word, let's say, this sucks, and then we want it to be, text, or we want it to be a yes, no answer, and then we could just say, come here. And at this point, you could just kind of scroll down, and then you could just add, I want to look for a drum loop that doesn't suck, stuff like that. So you could now just kind of have all of your own attributes. Now, we also see people using this for particular projects as well, because sometimes if you're working with the same client, I know a lot of my MIDI programming friends sometimes don't want to use the same sounds ever again with a client or for a project. Or, you know, if I use this sound on one record, it's kind of in a lot of circles taboo to use that same sound on the follow-up record. So you always want something kind of fresh and exciting. So you could actually have, you know, all the tags, I used it on this song for this artist for this album, and then that way you can say, okay, find sounds that I didn't use on that album with that artist. So it gets to be an incredibly powerful tool for kind of managing all of your different aspects for, you know, all the kind of components, presets and audio files, MIDI files and loops for your Cubase production. So it gets to be kind of a great thing to kind of get familiar with. And now with the inclusion of having kind of the mini version of the MediaBay directly here and being able to kind of just drag and drop will make it kind of much easier to work with. So we kind of covered questions on third-party content, being able to find that within the MediaBay, and the attribute inspector, and kind of covering some of the slicing and drag and dropping. I'll pass on that feedback to our developers as well, but you know, since it's right in as soon as you drop it directly into the Cubase project window, I think if you try that, that may kind of fit your needs. All right, now the last function that we had, question that we had on MediaBay was if you made your own kind of preferences or your own presets. So one of the things people sometimes, we had a couple questions that people were having a hard time finding their own user presets. So, and there's a couple of tricks that I could probably pass on that I do personally. So we'll open up just kind of the full MediaBay here. So, and we'll just go to our media menu. That would help. All right. So, and when we go to our full MediaBay, let's say if I actually, or we can actually do this with our abbreviated MediaBay. So let's say if I have an audio track here and I wanted to make my own track presets. Let's say, okay, my volume is here, my panning is here, I have my channel strip settings. So say I have a noise gate, a vintage compressor, my de-esser, let's say maximizer, and a magneto, and we have our EQ. And now what we want to do, if we really like this channel, let's say we know that this is how we get a great piano sound or a great bass sound or a great vocalist with this singer and this microphone for tracking, you could just right click and then save it as a track preset. Now as you come here, you could actually put it into a new folder right there. But you could also come here and you could actually add kind of your own attributes. So if you click here, you could see kind of your own attributes. But I'm just going to type in a name. So when I do this, often when I'm making my own presets, I'll just put my initials in. So I'll say GO, and we'll say vocal preset. Or say lead vox, something like that. And if you wanted to, you could just say, okay, let's, and you can say for category, if you wanted to be as far as this, so you could say, okay, let's just come here, and we want this for vocal. For character, you could have, okay, this is going to be, you know, clean. This is going to be mono. This will be, you know, so different attributes there. You could also say this is going to be for country music. You could also see ratings and different stars. And now you could also do kind of subcategories. So you could say, okay, you know, you want this or sub style. So you could say, okay, let's make it Americana country music. So you could do stuff like that, and then just kind of hit OK. So if I was looking for my track preset, and sometimes a lot of people can get hung up in that they come here to their MediaBay and they have different filtering options selected. Okay, and sometimes you have to be very aware of that, because sometimes, you know, people will go, okay, I'm looking for my lead vocal, but, you know, I don't see it listed here. But it's because we're looking for a world ethnic accordion sound, and that's kind of the attributes that we have selected here. So if I just wanted to come directly here, you could actually just kind of, if we just click right here, you could actually just reset all the filters. So since I have named the file, all you have to do is, you see this little text box here. You can now just say, okay, GO. And then at that point, we can say we're looking for a track preset. And then here's my GO lead vox. So if I just drag this over, you know, I could just drag that directly over. Let's say I have this new audio channel. And then all you'd have to do is, I could just drag that directly over there. And now when I open up this channel, we could see all the different settings would automatically be carried over. So you could just drag and drop. So, you know, if you just kind of label it, and also if you say, okay, we just want to look for, you know, ratings of 5 stars or 4 stars, you could do that. And if we have plugins, we can also just come here. So let's say if I instantiate an insert effect. So let's say we wanted to have a compressor. So I'll just open up, we'll say an envelope shaper here. All right, and now I want to make my own preset here. So we'll just say save preset. So, and again, I'll just call it GO envelope. All right, so it's called GO that. And now when I go back to any other preset here, you can see your preset name here. So now if I just type in GO, you can just simply double click and have that preset done. Now, if I wanted to, again, come here and say, okay, let's go to my different plugin presets, and if I didn't have an actual effect here, you can say, okay, let's look at our different attributes here. And then, you know, once you have this open, you could just say, okay, we're looking again for our different types of data, and you could just drag and drop any of your files here. So we just say, okay, let's just come here, and, you know, so you could just, again, just drag and drop any track preset, instrument preset. So, you know, even if I come here and let's say, okay, I'm looking for not only just a track preset, but a plugin preset. So once I have that selected, I could just say, okay, let's make it GO, and then we'll add a space here. And then at that point, you could just kind of, you know, be able to kind of find your stuff as well. But if we have an instrument preset, we could now just drag the instrument over, and now that will actually just add the VST instrument that we just kind of dragged over. Now, where all these files will get saved to, and where you could access them in like kind of the full MediaBay if you get stuck, is just by, when you go here to the VST sound, and you see this on the left with the locations, and they'll all be just kind of placed directly into the user location. So if I just want to rescan that, so at that point you could just see all your different plugin presets that you create will just go directly into the user location. So that way, you know, so kind of naming it and giving it some additional stars, that could really kind of just help you find your different presets later. All right, so we'll go back and look at some more of the questions. Okay, so we'll go back to our list here that I've had written up from people sending in. I appreciate people sending in their questions in advance in case I need to do some preparation for this. Okay, so we had some questions on slicing of the audio. So let me just go back to a previous project where I think we had some drum loops. Okay. So one of the things that you could do when you work with audio is to slice it up. And, you know, often this is done for several reasons. One of them could be like if you wanted to clean up an audio recording, like, or if you wanted to quantize drums, being able to kind of slice up your different sounds, or if you have a drum loop. So let's say if we have a drum loop that sounds like this. So now if I wanted to, now, you know, as we mentioned, since Cubase 7.5, you know, as you record audio or as audio is dropped directly into the project, it automatically does an analysis for all of the hit points, and we see this. So, and we could actually, once you come here to the hit points, we could actually see kind of the threshold here. So let's say if, you know, if you had drums and you wanted to, and let's say if you had drums that had bleeding, like bleed through, at this point you could just come right here and maybe, like, if we just wanted like the kicks in this example, and, you know, we may not want like the drums are bleeding through, so you could adjust the threshold here, and this is just in the inspector and going to hit points. So as we go to kind of the inspector here, we could just do this. So and we could think of this almost like a visual noise gate. So if you want to, you know, just kind of set your threshold here. Now, if I do this, now there's a couple things that you can do. One of them is if you wanted to now create slices. So now when you double click, you actually, this will take it into what's called the part editor. And you could have each of these as individual slices right there. So now if you wanted to just grab kind of the snare drum, we could just kind of grab the play tool, and you could audition each of your different slices. So if you just wanted to grab that as a sample, you could do that. Now, also, once we have slices done, if we really kind of, some other things that you could do is, let's say if we undo our last step here and we go back into our sample editor, if we really like a particular groove or the feel of a track, you could actually come here and create a groove. So it's going to do an analysis of that actual file here, and we'll say create groove. And now when we go into your quantize setup and we go to the quantize panel, you'll actually see this is the groove that we extracted, and that can be saved as a preset. So that way, if you're like, okay, I have this great feeling drums and I can't lock in the MIDI part really well, what you're able to do is just simply do an analysis of that, and at that point say, let's just save that as a quantize preset, so you could actually kind of do a groove quantize based on kind of existing areas. Now, if you wanted to, again, from these slices, you could create the groove. You could also add markers, regions, events, or warp markers. And also something that's really handy is where you could actually do MIDI notes. And this may be kind of more applicable, like if you wanted to do drum replacement. So let's say if I come here, I think we have... just find a quick, okay, we'll open up this project. And let's say if we wanted to do drum replacement. So let's say we kind of listen to this project here. So let's say if I want to do some sample replacement. all I'd have to do is I could just click right here on one of my parts. At this point, we could also just say, okay, we have our slices here. So what we want to do is, again, set our hit points. We're going to set our threshold, because if we listen to just our kick drums here, and we'll just go ahead and solo the editor, you'll hear like some of the tracks bleeding through, like the hi-hat or snares. So I may not want to include those different elements. So now I have a track here that's kind of loaded up with a kind of a rock kit in Groove Agent SE. So what I could do is, let's say, okay, I want that kick drum. So if I wanted to replace that kick from a real recording, and this is done all the time in studios, is we could say, let's once we found our hit points, we'll say let's create MIDI notes, and I'll say let's make those MIDI notes C1. And as we do that, we could have some different options. So we could create a new MIDI track, or I'm going to find the selected track, and this will automatically carry over the dynamics as well. So as we do this, we can see that a MIDI track has been created. And we open up Groove Agent here. So if I wanted to mute the original kick drums and just have the sample fired off, or augment the originals. So you could use kind of slicing of the audio for that. Now, another thing that you could do, if you find that the drums perhaps at times, you know, like we hear and probably see a lot of drummers that when they do a drum fill can actually speed up or slow down a little bit and kind of lose the groove. So if I wanted to take all of these drum tracks, I could put them into a folder. So you could select them and just kind of right click and choose Move Selected Tracks to New Folder. And as you do that, we could activate something directly on the folder here where you could actually just do group editing. So if let's say before I do that, I just want to find, like in this case, my kicks. So we found our hit points there. And let's find our snares. And let's go ahead and just kind of set our threshold here. And let's do maybe hi-hats as well in this case. So once we kind of have this threshold set for these devices, we can now apply them into group editing. So we can select all these different tracks, and then you could open up the quantize panel. And then you could actually kind of set different priorities, where the kick may have the highest priority over snares and the hi-hats. So at this point, you could say, okay, we're going to take our snare top, and let's just take this out. So we have our kick and our snare, and let's choose our hi-hat. And then at this point, you could just say, we're going to come here, and now it's going to apply all these different edits across all of our drum tracks. So we could say, let's slice, and now it's kind of sliced every track based on kind of the relevance of those particular files. We could choose our quantized template. So if we say, okay, I want this to be 16th notes, and now you could just say, let's quantize the drums, and now it's going to clean up kind of all your different drum fills. So if you had, you know, a fill that was a little bit out of time, you know, in some other programs this is called Beat Detective, but this allows you to kind of do multi-track drum quantizing very easily. And as you do this also, you can kind of do it by slices, and then you could also just choose to do the last step, which would be to do a crossfade. So, you know, but you have kind of a couple different options right there for cleaning up kind of your acoustic drums, and as well as kind of doing your drum replacement. And it's kind of, again, all by using slices to do that. So slicing can be very powerful production tool. And if you're doing a lot of other things, let's say if I open up another great thing that you could use slicing for is kind of doing loop construction and loop deconstruction. So let me just switch back to another project here. So if I have a drum loop here, let's say the one we were listening to previously. So now if I wanted to just kind of create my slices, and let's say I have just a blank instance of Groove Agent loaded up here. So if you, with Groove Agent SE, what you could do is actually just kind of select the instrument, one of the instrument pads, and I could drag this drum loop directly into my instrument pad. So now I could actually just kind of trigger just that particular drum loop. Now, let's say if I didn't want to have the same exact drum loop, but I wanted variations because maybe other people have used kind of the same drum loop. So if I want to click here, we could go to our Slice tab within Groove Agent SE. And then we'll say Create Slices, and we could do it based on the transient. So once I click on Create Slices, we could see that it's taken like this snare, hi-hat, and it's kind of sliced it for us automatically. So now if I want to just click every single slice here, every element has been broken apart. So if I wanted just the snare or just a hi-hat. Now, as it does this, Groove Agent SE will automatically create a pattern pad. So what's interesting here is we can say, okay, we have our slice loop, and now I could just drag that onto my timeline. So we'll just go ahead and let's turn our snap on. So once I do that, and let's say I just wanted to do some variations of that. So I'm just going to hit Control D to duplicate a couple times. Move this over, and I'm going to just kind of randomly take this drum loop here. All right, and then let's say the next loop, I just want to take the MIDI notes and just we'll go to our functions menu here and just reverse that. So now I could have my original drum loop, and now it's going to trigger each of those slices with the same timing. And now let's say we'll have our so we have this as individual MIDI events. And my variation. Reversed. And then you can just do kind of straight back. Now, if you like this variation, you can now go to the pattern pad and just drag and drop, and then you could have your different patterns here. So it allows you also through slicing to construct and deconstruct loops. So, it's like really handy things that you could do as slicing. So it's kind of a really kind of cool thing to do. Now, we had a question, I believe this was from Greg as well, about punching in on instrument tracks. And I think you wanted to go back. I think you wanted to actually hear the existing part. Let me just go through the comments here real quick. And for Jake, it was like how about beat slicing, say, to match a guitar part. Once you have your MIDI here or your MIDI, you can just simply quantize that audio, and it's going to move the slice position. So that way you could find the groove quantized feel of the guitar part and have the drums lock up to that, or vice versa. All right, so I'm just going to make sure I have Greg's question correct about okay, so I see another question from Greg about hooking up a second set of monitors and that you have a UR44. So if you just take the outputs, so on the UR44 you have the main outputs, and then you also have So you have 4 outputs. So all you need to do is like take outputs 1 and 2 to one set of monitors, and outputs 3 and 4 to another pair of monitors. So, and what's great about the control room is that you could now come over here and say, okay, I have, let's say, Yamahas and Genelecs, and I could now at this point, so I have my UR44 here, and I could say, okay, my Genelecs are connected to outputs 3 and 4 of my UR44. And now when I go into my mixer, I'll just close this out, and you go into the control room, you'll see your monitor selection here, and you could just toggle back and forth between your different monitors right there. Now, if you find that one pair of monitors has a louder amplifier, or when you switch that there's a kind of a volume change between the 2 monitors and you want those to be very consistent, if you have your monitors selected here and then go to your setup page, you could now, what you could do is kind of just play a test tone or playback audio that you're familiar with, and then you could adjust the level of each of the speakers that you kind of choose. So that way, because one thing when you're kind of switching speakers, a lot of people fall victim to is as they're kind of listening to different speakers, the speakers that are louder sound better to them, and just because our brains are kind of dumb that way. So if you're using multiple speakers, what's great about this is you just can switch right here to easily compare without going through any hardware, which in fact will color the signal. But as you do this, you can also regulate kind of the monitoring volume between the 2. So that way you could just have your 2 different speakers connected and not have any worries about that. All right, so I think you'll just go back. I think Greg had another question about recording. All right, so let me just. Okay, so Greg's question was, when punching in on an instrument track and the recording kicks in, how can I not hear what I'm recording over? Okay, so there's several different modes directly on the transport. So if we wanted to come here, what you need to do is you'll see common record modes. So if we choose to come here, we could say, okay, when we have an audio record mode, and then we have our MIDI record modes. So if you wanted to merge those files, one of the things that you might, what you may have it set to is to merge, and what you may want to actually have it set to is just simply here to new parts. So once you kind of just click here on the transport, you could just say you want to create a new part, or choose to, so you have your different options here. So you could mix, you could overwrite, keep last, you can stack. So just change those settings directly there, and then you should be all set with that. So experiment with that, and then you're not merging where you're hearing the part that you're trying to replace. You should be good. And Greg also had a question about tempo track. Let me just kind of read it. So it says you're fiddling around with the tempo tracks. So say, take an example of a song already recorded and then sync it to a tempo track. So I'll show you in both audio and MIDI for this. So I think I have an example up here that we could show. Okay, so let's say if we wanted to, one of the great things with Cubase is the whole concept of tempo detection. And a lot of times we see people that really have to kind of play differently to work with the click track, so there's a correlation between the bar and beat and to what they're actually playing or performing. And a lot of times, people feel, especially in early days of MIDI, that they had to play very strictly to time. And sometimes what we actually cherish in great recordings is a great musical feel that kind of breathes, that speeds up and slows down, and sounds very musical that way. So let's say if we want to take an example here, like a solo piano. And let's say we turn on a click track. And the click track itself doesn't have any correlation. It was just played in very freely, rubato. So what I could do is I'm just going to, and this process works the same way for both MIDI and audio. So if I wanted to select this, I'll just go to my project menu. So I could right click and go to my project, and we could choose tempo detection. So I'm just going to click on analyze. Now before I do that, and we saw how incredibly long that takes, if I wanted to look at my part in, let's say, a standard notation, and while it kind of looks okay and we listen to it, I'll just jump back to the beginning here. So, if you actually gave this to someone to read, it's not going to make a lot of sense to them. So now we'll just click on Analyze. Now we look at our notation view. And one of the things, as you do this, it's going to place it into like a 1/4 meter, because it's kind of determining everything by the beat. So if I come here, as I do this, it's created a tempo track as well as a signature track. So I'm going to place a signature track right there at the beginning to 4/4. So now when you go look at our notation view of it, if we watch our tempo here, just going to fluctuate. So then we have that tempo map that has been created. Now, if we want to do this for audio, I think I have an example we could use. And let's say we had a band that came in and played, again, without a click track. And let me just set my output routing here for this project. And there's no click track, really. So if I solo, let's say, the mandolin part here. So you could take just one of the parts, and then at this point just say, okay, I want to now at this point go to my project menu, and we'll do our tempo detection of this. And we'll listen to kind of all the tracks. So just kind of take one track off, and the drums work great. So let's go ahead now, and if I needed to, let's say we're gonna find our downbeat of our piece here. So let's say
1, 2, 1, 2.
Okay, so
1.
All right, so we have a count in from the singer. So at this point, we'll just come right here, put in our 4/4 bar.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
So now we determined what the tempo is of the performance. Now, if we wanted to actually just change the tempo to make it more steady, or let's say if I wanted to now actually do something, let's say I wanted to add a drum loop to this track. So if we have our tempos that are fluctuating, we can add just an audio track. And let's go ahead to our MediaBay and let's find a drum loop here. So now I'm just going to drag and drop this in right there, something horribly inappropriate. So we'll just say, okay, let's just start this right here. And now we could have this track in musical mode. So if we wanted to look at our info line, once you have kind of an event selected, we could choose for this mode to be in musical mode. And now let's say if I just kind of copy this, we could take the existing performance here, then we can have the other audio.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
And we'll go ahead and just kind of make this track a little louder here. So this loop is now basically just following the tempo changes. So, well, we took kind of a, very, just a, a loop that was one steady tempo. It's now kind of almost a tempo parasite. So if I want to do this with the mandolin. Now, another thing that you could do that's really kind of cool is if I wanted to take this existing performance and just change the tempo and make it, let's say, just actually just delete this track here. So if I select these tracks, at this point, if you go to the audio menu, and we go to advanced, there's a great function here called set definition from tempo. So what it's done now is it's applied the metadata of the tempo changes on every single beat to all of the files. So if I come here and I wanted the whole track to be slower or faster, going to be 144 beats a minute. So now you could just kind of, just change the tempo afterwards if you want it to be straight, perfectly even, or if you just want to speed up and slow down, you could just adjust this in real time. So you could do some pretty amazing things kind of with the tempo handling inside of Cubase. So, finding the tempo, being able to have other tracks conform to that tempo, or be able to take all your tracks and have that be a completely new tempo where you could kind of fix it or just kind of, again, make that track breathe a little bit. So the tempo handling can be, so the tempo handling is pretty amazing inside. So, and there's a question of, does the tempo track control all the tracks at the same time? But you could also, there's two different modes for tracks. So you could look at, tracks can be placed, and this question from Jake. So once we come here, if, tracks can be in musical mode or they can be in linear mode. So if I wanted to come here, when you see, usually by default, Cubase will default here to musical mode, and we see this little quarter note here. So if we have it in linear mode means that the timing and placement is based on the time. So it's saying, okay, this starts at 30 seconds. So if I do a tempo change, that's not going to change. But if it's in musical mode, these will automatically follow the tempo maps for you. So if you didn't want particular tracks, like maybe you had an audio cue for a film score where, you know, it lined up visually to an element and you wanted the other tracks to speed up and slow down, that one thing that you wanted to be kind of locked in time, you would put into linear mode, but the other tracks could be inside of musical mode, and now they would follow the tempos for you. Okay, just going through some of the questions. Okay, so we'll go through some of the audio warp. So we had a quick question on solo defeat. Let's go ahead and take a listen to that. We'll jump to another project here. Okay, so let's say if we had... and the solo defeat's kind of an interesting concept, and this also is used in conjunction with the control room. So so if I come here, one of the things that's really handy is, let's say, if I have like just a multi-track playing here. And now let's say, now you may notice that you have kind of a traditional solo here. So let's say we're kind of playing along. So say I want to take my bass part here. Now if I solo it, all the other tracks get muted, and that's often kind of a very typical situation. So solo it, all your tracks get defeated. But maybe you want to hear the track in context, and that's why you see this little L, or the listen bus. And once I open that up in my control room function, you could go here and you'll see a listen dim. So at this point, you could just choose how much the tracks kind of fade out a little bit. So if you want to hear that kind of more in context. So again, I could solo the bass track or dim the other tracks, and it's kind of the solo safe mode. And this is also like really ideal for, you know, if you're working with different musicians that are recording, you know, they still hear the same mix, and you could be in the control room just kind of auditioning things to make sure everything is okay as you're tracking. And at that point, you know, they're still hearing their full mix, and it's not affecting other people listening in their headphone mixes. So if you want to come here and just let's listen to just a snare or the hi-hat. So I see a question from Greg. I think this is in dealing with your UR44 interface, going back to our speakers. So you see, so you plug them into line outputs 1 and 2. So probably what you want to do is the second pair of monitors into 3 and 4. So the main outs and 1 and 2 are basically mirrored. So it's going to be sending the same signal. So if you want to send 2 different signals, have one go out of your main outputs, or 1 and 2. And the second pair of monitors go out of outputs 3 and 4. So we had a question about kind of some audio warp and definitions within the sample editor. Let me just kind of scroll back through some other questions, make sure I'm not missing some points. All right. Just kind of going through some of our comments here, if you just bear with me. All right, so let's take a quick look at some of the sample editing with some of the warp definitions and stuff like that. So we'll just come here. Okay, and then I see we have a question about pan laws as well. So we'll go ahead and get that set up. All right, so when we go into our sample editor, let me just jump to another project here. We have some drum loops. Okay, so within the sample editor, you could do kind of a lot of different, a lot of different functions. So, one of the things is you can define it to be in musical mode if you need to kind of reset what the grid is going to be based on. So if it's quarter, eighth, or 16th, if you need to kind of auto adjust, kind of, and often a definition is dealing with tempos, like how fast a particular file is. So the tempo could be like really critical for a lot of programs. So when you deal with a lot of drum loops, kind of having the definition or that metadata of the speed or tempo of the file could be really, really critical for that. Now, if I wanted to come here to my audio warp, so here we could actually put it into musical mode. And if we wanted to kind of just change the feel of different things, but one of the coolest things is something called free warp. So if we actually just kind of come here, and let's say you just want to take something and just kind of stretch it out, or this came in a little early or a little late, you could just kind of take your different elements and just kind of freely warp that around. So a lot of times, people think that they, from using other programs, feel that they need to kind of do this for every single attribute. And, and that's why they have, the popular, like tab to transient function, is so useful in other programs because you have to kind of do all that stuff manually for the most part. But, if you wanted to just kind of change the tempos within Cubase, it's really, like I tend not to even really, audio warp is just kind of basically taking the audio and stretching it to fit the current tempo. And that's something we introduced. It was Cubase SX3 that we did that you could just kind of change the tempo of your audio on the fly. So other programs, you kind of have to, set all these, warp markers manually. But with Cubase, as you just saw in kind of the previous example, you don't necessarily have to define the hit points. It's kind of the stretching is not necessarily based where the user has to define the hit points. The program will kind of find those for you. Now, as you do this, depending on the actual, warping, you may have it, there could be different algorithms as well. So if we kind of come here, you could actually, you could, and you see some different things within the tempo line. But, one of the things, if you're stretching audio and if you're doing a lot, you could actually, let me see, I think we could do it right here. Let me just, well, I know we can do it in, where I often do it is in the audio pool, which is really handy here. So if I go to my media, we can just go to our pool, and some people go, okay, what's the difference between like the pool window and MediaBay? MediaBay shows you all the media that's on your computer, and the pool is specific for that project. So if you wanted to come here, you could actually have your different algorithms. So we could see here, if we just kind of switch, you could choose that this audio algorithm is going to be allowed. There's some of the excuse me, previous algorithms for stretching. So some that are more for plucked instruments like guitar, or some that are more guitar orient or drum, like percussive or vocals. But there's also kind of this whole range of elastic algorithms. So when you actually want to do different stretching from your info line on your Cubase project window, you could actually stretch. And we see kind of almost three different types of algorithms. Three different variations on algorithms. So we're going to have kind of, efficient, which is if you have kind of an older computer or you're doing just, 200 tracks. There's also formant preservation, which will make, alleviate the chipmunk effect that's often heard on vocals when you do processing. And then you also kind of have the pro algorithm. And within each of these, there's 3 different ones. You have time, pitch. So again, if it's going to be rhythmic based, think of time. Think of pitch for maybe vocals or something that's more melodic. And tape machine mode will actually allow you to do, as you do different tempo changes. Let me just go ahead and I'll just show you what you can do with the tape machine mode. So if I have my tempo map here, we'll just add a tempo track. Let me just, okay. So we have my tempo track here, and I'll just move these tracks right here. So once I have this audio file set to tape mode, the pitch, generally the pitch isn't affected. So say I'll just jump here. We'll activate this project. I'll say we'll play our drum loop here. So once I wanted to come here, if I just change my tempo and kind of just draw in different tempo changes here, I'll activate my tempo bar here. And let me just turn my snap off. You could do almost like tape stop effects. So this way we kind of do just a very fast tempo change that will mimic kind of the analog tape sound. So like when you have an analog tape and you slow it down. So if you want to do kind of different tape stop effects, that's the tape machine algorithm will base the pitch and change the pitch based on the tempo, whereas the other ones, the pitch will maintain. So you have the 3 different algorithms, and again, time, more optimized for rhythmic material, pitch for melodic material, and for doing kind of mimicking the behavior of changing the speed or vary speed of analog tape decks. You can just use the tape mode for that. And again, so you have kind of 9 different algorithms in the Elastic Pro, as well as the additional algorithms for kind of optimizing it for a particular audio file, so it kind of uses the correct algorithm. So usually the default modes work very well, but it should be kind of an easy, so kind of play around with it if you need to. All right, so we had a question about stereo pan law. This is kind of an interesting topic. So if I come here, let me just jump back to the other project we're on. Okay, so we'll just have this kind of multi-track loop play. Now, once you're in Cubase, what's kind of interesting is one thing a lot of people don't know is if we just wanted to, let's look at just our master fader here on the right-hand side. So, there's actually, 3 different panners. So a lot of people don't understand this. So if I want to just kind of take this and pan it like that. And if you want to get to the center, you could just click Control, and I'll take you right to the center. Now, if you wanted to, you could also say, okay, I want a stereo combined panner. So if you want it to be, and you could just kind of hold the mouse down and go up and down if you want it to be kind of a narrow sounding mix or wider sounding. So when you get to different tracks, you could have them have, different panning options. So again, you could just kind of come here and say, okay, let's look at our standard panner. Now, as we kind of work with this, one of the functions that you see that's kind of unique to Cubase is pan laws, and this is set up in the project window. So we go to here to our project setup. And then here we're going to have a choice. Let me just take a quick look for our pan law settings. All right, so we see our stereo pan law. And sometimes, you could actually, if we actually and this kind of goes into, some of the physics of audio and how you want the audio to behave, because if you double the signal of of an audio file, if you add 2 files and basically doubling the sound, you add 3 dB. So with this, you could actually have, you can manipulate kind of the physics of how the panning is set. So as you kind of pan to the far extreme, like to the far left or far right, you can see how much of that signal will drop off and based on the pan law. So if I have my pan law set to 0 dB, and we kind of listen to this track. And now we'll kind of switch it to pan law. I'll say to -6 dB. So you can hear kind of how this may not be so obvious over the speaker, over kind of YouTube audio, but you can hear it get a little softer, but the sound will get wider as well. So again, if we listen to this, so you can kind of have your choice of different like width control, if you will. So we say, okay, we go to 0 dB, hit OK. Hear how things are kind of more center panned. And now we'll kind of, as we have our panning on the extreme ends, and we hit OK, it could get a little softer but sound much wider. So a lot of people will choose to manipulate the pan law for a particular project so that they know if they want like a big wide mix to get a lot of different elements in, like, where, sometimes people are finding frequencies kind of fighting each other. By adjusting the pan law out to, to varying amounts, that way you could give yourself kind of a little more of a wide sonic spectrum to use with the panning. So you can kind of play around with it for different settings and listen to it, but it's we have a lot of really noted engineers who love the Steinberg products because they can change the pan law. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and refresh some of the comments here on my end, and we'll see if we have some more questions that are trickling in. Okay. We'll say goodnight to Charles. He tuned in from the UK. It's like 1 in the morning, 1:30 in the morning for him. All right, so we had a question about not having latency latency when you put the multiband compressor in a stereo bus. So if I wanted to come here, multiband compressors often have kind of a really high level of latency because, you know, often it's like, you know, almost thinking of it as 4 plugins in one. So if I wanted to come here, let's go to multiband compressor. Okay, and I'll just open up a quick preset here. So say we'll so if I kind of just bypass the plugin, so we'll make it a little more obvious sounding here. So the multiband compressor is really cool because, you know, you could actually just kind of change the compression based on different frequency ranges. So if you want to just compress those frequencies versus those frequencies. So say, okay, I want the bass and I want that to be compressed, and you kind of see the So one of the things that you see in the Cubase Pro 8 is live mode. So this will actually kind of look ahead to the audio files, and at that point, that will significantly minimize the latency. It's basically, imperceptible latency. So one of the cool things with the Cubase Pro 8 is with the multiband compressor, the multiband expander, the multiband envelope shaper, they all have this live mode. So play around with that, and that will definitely help with your latency issues that you're running into within Cubase there. So now we'll go ahead and take a look, see if I have some other questions that were kind of maybe I missed that people had sent in. I think we got through most of these. All right, and let me just refresh the questions. If you guys have questions, feel free to put them in the comments field here. I'll just go back and review some, make sure I didn't miss some here. All right, and if I've missed a question from earlier that perhaps you typed in, please feel free to go ahead and enter it again in the comments field. Just kind of going back through the sent in questions. Yeah, I see the comments from DJ Matt about the VST Connect. So I'll work on getting a video done to get that. So for the internet collaboration, it's kind of tricky to do, obviously, as I'm doing all my internet bandwidth for the broadcast. But I'll work on, we have the NAMM show coming up next week, so it might be the week after, where I'll try to get a video to kind of walk you through that. So it's a great feature for collaboration. But you could email me offline or just leave a comment, and I could contact you, and we could try a couple things as well. So once again, if you have questions, please feel free to go ahead and ask. If not, we could kind of make up some stuff here. We can show you some of the cool new things that maybe aren't so obvious. Okay, see some more comments coming in. So I'm seeing a question about the double clicking not working in Cubase Pro 8 from XB Royal X. I haven't had any issues with the double clicking. So if you could clarify where you're running it, I think that would, I haven't run into any problems, and I've been kind of running it on 4 or 5 different computers pretty regularly. So maybe if you could clarify that. And we have the question from Ricardo about rendering rewire sounds like VST sounds. I believe it's going to work the same way. I haven't run Reason in years, but I believe that it will work the same exact way. So if you wanted to do some of the rendering functions, there's a lot of great capabilities here with the new rendering. So let me just open up a quick project, and we could show off some of the rendering. I haven't, again, personally tried it with Rewire, and I haven't run Rewire devices in forever. But I'm inclined to think that it's going to work the same way. So one of the things that we wanted to do in Cubase Pro 8 was kind of make the whole process of, turning audio, rendering audio segments or rendering, MIDI sections into audio very simple. And it's a very handy thing to do. And, there's always workarounds before. So you could freeze tracks, but then you couldn't really, if you needed to move a note, you couldn't really edit the audio, as easily. It was kind of hidden in the background. You could, export, like solo the files, set the range, and export the files. And then sometimes that would always add it at the very bottom of the project window. And if you had another track that was open, you could sometimes render a piano. And if you had a piano or if you had a vocal that was open, that could be rendered along with it. So, and then, we introduced batch export where you could do it all in kind of one fell swoop. But people wanted to kind of do it and maintain it within a project. So if you click on a part, you can right click and you'll see a render in place dialog. So you could actually just choose render right there, and what that'll do is it's going to automatically add an audio track directly below the part. At that point, we had it mute that section. At that point, so we see our, we're just going to play that audio. Now it mutes the MIDI part, so it's not going to double up. And if I wanted to take an instrument here, like let's say, okay, I want to take this string part, we could also, if I have a part selected, choose to render. And you have a render setup dialog too. And this is, and this is pretty straightforward. And they did a really great implementation with this. So if I wanted to have that as one contiguous event, or if I have multiple events selected, I could have them as one part or as a block. We could also choose to have it dry, so where there's no effects. We could include the channel settings, which includes insert effects, the EQs, and the channel strip functions, or also the complete signal path, which adds the send effects, or the complete signal path with the master effects. If I have multiple parts, we could choose to mix it down to one file, or you could also choose to add a tail. So if you have a reverb or a delay that's kind of extending or sounding beyond the boundary of the part, you could choose to just simply have that in seconds or bars and beats. And you could choose a couple of different options. So if you have just the event selected, you could choose to mute the source track. But if you have the track selected, you could come here and say, we want to remove the source tracks, and basically that would get rid of the MIDI part, so it just has the audio, or you could disable the source tracks. And this is really interesting because what it allows you to do is to unload the instrument from the computer's processing and memory usage. So that way you could just simply unload that instrument and have the audio playback. So if you're really kind of pushing the envelope of your CPU, it's some great choices there. So even if I have multiple events, I can select, a couple of events here. So let's say I just kind of split this part here, and I want to select these events. Okay, so we'll just refreshing here. So I just want to select a couple of different events here. Let's say, okay, let's take that part and this part, these three events. So now I could just right click and choose to render. And again, so I don't have to go hunting for the files. And what's even really clever about it, it actually will extract the color from the original part and apply that to the audio event. So that way it's kind of locked together just that easily. So even if you have external MIDI devices, I know that the rendering works, but if you're going out to a piece of hardware, like a synthesizer, like a motif or something like that, it would have to do it in real time. But I'm inclined to think that the rendering would work just like that for rewired devices. as well. So should be pretty straightforward, but you can give it a try and let me know. Leave a question in the comments field. Okay, so all right, so I'm reading through some of our questions here. Okay, so so I see a question on VST System Link about being upgradable without having to use audio interfaces. I haven't heard of that, but I'll inquire about that. Okay, I'm seeing questions about the resizing bug. So it changes the zoom setting by itself from Claudius LeBlanc. Okay. So, one thing to be aware of is as you're, a lot of people are kind of used to, using the G and H keys for zooming. And if you have two different screens, I haven't really run into, I had some resizing issues with some of the very first versions of Cubase 7, I believe until like 7.02. But if you have a couple of different screens, like let's say what a common setup is what I have in my studio is my mixer on one screen and my project window on a different screen. So, it's really easy to, be cognizant, and let's say if I, be aware that, and let me just open up my mixer and I'll just resize it a bit here. So, if I have this as my active window and hit G and H, that's going to zoom there. But if I have this as my active window, this will zoom. So sometimes I've seen people, when using multiple monitors, not be aware that they're kind of zooming on the wrong screen. So try that. I'm not sure if that's your question, Claudius, but I think being aware of that, it took me just a little while to kind of get my hands wrapped around that, and some of that behavior, with the mixer changed in 7, and also with 8. One of the things, and I think this is Greg's question about the project window resizing. So like in Cubase 7.5, often you could run into situations where if you opened up, let's say, like your instrument rack on a particular, let me just go to the right function key here. So if you had your instrument rack, sometimes opening up one window could cause another window, like the project window, to resize. The trick, and this is only on PC platform, but one of the tricks to do is to actually just manually just take that window and manually kind of maximize it. Don't use the maximize button or the restore button, but just kind of manually maximize it, and then that will kind of keep its position. And that's one of the big things that changed with Cubase Pro 8 is kind of all the window handling. So it's something, that is a little bit behind the scenes, especially on Windows users. But now, instead of like all your different projects showing up in like your Windows menu here and only being there, you could actually just kind of Alt-Tab between your different projects. Or if you wanted to just Windows tab on a Windows platform, you could just kind of navigate between. So, and this is called an MDI interface, or a multiple document interface window, which will allow you to kind of handle that. So all that window handling from like Cubase 7 and 7.5 is on the Windows platform is pretty radically changed. And I think why they still kind of maintain that is for kind of backward compatibility for people that were running on XP. I don't think XP was officially supported since Cubase 6, but there's obviously a lot of people running it. And if you're pretty clever, you could get Cubase 7 and 7.5 running on XP. but it wasn't really supported. And now with 8, I don't think you could really run it on XP. So they don't have to kind of be backward compatible, which is something you have to kind of think of, in software development, that, people are still using older operating systems, and, you don't want to just completely shut them off. I see another question from Greg about like adding 12 bars in a project, let's say a 12-bar section in a song. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at how you could do that. There's a couple ways. So we'll just kind of take this. Let me just refresh the comments here on my end. Okay, so one quick question I'm seeing from Burbank Productions is, check a box for musical modes. Is it always possible for Cubase to do this automatically? So there is a preference to be aware of, and it really could depend on what is your primary time display. So generally, by default, Cubase will be musical mode, and Nuendo, which is used more for post-production, is going to be in linear mode. But if we wanted to come here to our preferences, let me just find the preference real quick. So if you go to editing, you could have the default track time type set to musical here. So under editing preferences, or you could have that set to time linear, or to follow the main transport display, or transport main display. So what this means is, if my main display is set to time, that it'll be in linear mode. If it's set to bars and beats, it'll be in musical mode. So, but if you wanted to set it to musical mode automatically, again, just go to your editing preferences and just set it right there. And then as you add tracks, they'll automatically be added directly back into musical mode. All right, so the question is like adding 12 bars in the middle of a project. So let me just jump back to like our multi-track here. So we'll imagine, let's say our tambourine track here is our vocal. So one of the things you could do is I could actually just kind of set my locators here. And let's say if I want to, I think if I go to my edit, I haven't done this in a long time, I could actually just say split. So let me just try in conjunction. So one of the things, if you have marker tracks open, and if you grab the range selection tool and double click between the marker tracks, you can kind of select the entire range. So let me see if I get this. So if I go to my range here, and then let's choose to split. So now it has cut those different events right there. So double click with the range selection tool between two tracks, two markers. So, definitely use marker tracks so you can navigate pretty easily. So now if I wanted to take all these tracks, I can now, let's say, we'll go to my range, and I'll just say, let me just come here. So, and another handy trick is if you come directly here, you can kind of move your markers here. So let's say, I think you could just kind of select all the events here and move it over like that and say, okay, this is where our vocal is. And kind of do your arranging that way. But if I wanted to come here, let's say if I also just go to my, I believe my range edit, I could also come here and say, I think there's an insert silence, and this will be based on the left and right locators. And then if you had copied these events here, all you have to do is now we could go to the range, And then if you wanted to, let's say if we copied that, so like we could just and you could select the events, or I think if you come here and just select the range, that if we go to our range here, we could say let's do a global copy, and now kind of set your range here. And I believe if I did this correctly, we could just kind of paste that time. Nope. So playing around with some of the range selection tools, you could do it manually, or you could just kind of come right there and just kind of just paste based on your events here. So if now you just wanted to select this, copy, go to your left locator, paste. So, and then if you didn't want like the vocal, all you had to do is, you know, just mute the track or just click on it and just erase the tracks that you don't want to see there. So play around with some of the range tools. You could do a tremendous amount of stuff there for kind of changing your projects around. All right, let me just refresh some of the questions here. See if we have more comments. Be wrapping up pretty soon. I'm seeing a question about the synth Serum. Now uses a lot more CPU than it did in 7.5. Any tips on fixing that? I haven't worked with that plugin. I mean, generally we've seen most plugins actually use a lot less resources. So you know, one thing to check, you can see if it behaves. You know, sometimes when you use kind of multi-cores, some plugins don't use it. If you're doing, you know, one of the things that if you're doing a lot of multi-timbral instruments, sometimes splitting them into different instances can kind of map across multiple cores better. So if you have 4 voices, like on MIDI channel 1, 2, 3, and 4, instead of running it in a multi-timbral mode, run 4 instances, and that way it can kind of map across the different processing cores a little easier. So you could try that, or you know, try the rendering options, and that will allow you to have some options there, so you could just turn it into audio quickly and still kind of maintain the MIDI and disable the resources. All right, I'm just kind of going through some of the comments. We'll see if I missed any. If we have any other quick questions, please feel free to answer them. I'd like to thank everyone for hanging out in the Google Hangout. I hope everyone learned something. We'll see if there's some more questions trickling in. If not, we'll wrap up in a couple minutes. Okay, I'll just kind of refresh a couple times here and see if we have more questions. All right, so we had a question about for 32-bit plugins, does Cubase bridge automatically? Yeah, we have a plugin bridge, and some people find that bridge works better for some plugins, and there's another bridge called JBridge, which kind of takes a different approach, and that could work better for other plugins. But there are bridges that are available for Cubase for running your 32-bit plugins in 64-bit, because we realize that, you know, so many people have old plugins that they use, you know, day in and day out that have become such an integral part of their workflow. So we want to make sure that those are still available to use. So yes, there are bridges for the 64-bit and 64-bit versions for your 32-bit plugins. All right. All right, we'll see if we have any more questions. If not, we'll wrap up. Thanks again for everyone for checking out the Google Hangout. You could subscribe to the channel as well. This will be online probably in a couple hours where you could watch it again. And if someone wants to take the time and do like a quick summary of what topics or questions were covered at different times and kind of post it in the comments, that's always helpful for people so they can kind of jump around to a particular topic if they want. And you could subscribe to the channel. You know, there's also, like, we have Jimmy online here who has the Cubase Academy and Cubase Radio groups on Facebook, which are really great resources. So if you haven't subscribed to that, you could check that out as well. And again, you could subscribe to the Club Cubase channel and check out tutorials on the Steinberg software channel as well. So there's a lot of great resources. If you have topics in the future that you want covered, you could leave a message on the channel or in the comments field here, so that we can get those all covered for you. We'll just see if we have a couple more questions coming in. We'll wait a couple minutes. Yeah. All right. So I see a question about the VST Connect video. You know, I'm going to be going out to the NAMM show on Monday, and that's, so it may be like 2 weeks. I should have a little bit of time. NAMM is kind of crazy for the music manufacturers, so I'll have kind of a lot of 20-hour days coming up, but it's always a lot of fun. But I may not get to it before then, so I will work on to get one up on the channel. We'll see. I'll just refresh one more time. If not, we'll go ahead and wrap up. All right, and we'll wait and just refresh one more time. All right, so with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. I'd like to thank everyone for watching online. Let your friends know. Feel free to watch it afterwards. Feel free to subscribe to the channel, and also check out some of the Facebook groups like the Cubase Radio, where you can post tracks that you've done, and the Cubase Academy. And thanks for checking out. We'll be back in February, and if you have topics that you want covered for a February meeting, we'll get that. Just let me know in advance, or you could just kind of ask directly during the meeting. And we hope everyone learned some things. Have a great night, and hope everyone's going to have a great new year. Thank you very much.